Today, we're going to be diagnosing my deadouts to help you figure out what killed your hives this winter. There'll be some real life examples so you can see me go through the hives and go through the process of elimination to try to figure out exactly what happened to my hives. This is the only hive in this yard that didn't make it. It had very few bees going into the winter, so I thought it was going to be dead, but I must have missed it on that day that I looked. So the first thing to look at with the deadout is to see where the cluster is that died, and it's in the middle of the frames right down here. It's a little bit broken up. You can see the main cluster is right here, and then it kind of splinters off over here. So it could be something to do with them not being able to cluster, like it was a warm day and then they didn't get back together fully. But I'm going to break this open, and it's going to take me a little bit, and then we can look at the frames. I've pried at these frames for a solid minute and a half, so now I finally have one out. The biggest issue when you're looking at deadouts is everything's really compacted together with propolis, so you want to make sure that you don't just pull up on frames, otherwise you'll break the frame. So this first frame, it's got some sugar water from the fall. They didn't get all the way down in moisture. This could have been from after the bees died and then the moisture really seeped into the hives, and that's why this is too wet. Or it was my mistake and the bees didn't have enough time to get it ready for winter. So same thing with this frame. It's mostly not capped and it's just shaking right out of the frame, so high in moisture. So that's probably my fault, and that's could definitely be one of the reasons that they died, was they weren't able to get all the sugar water down to the right moisture. Let me know in the comments if you see this in your hives, because I've definitely seen it several times, and I'm not sure if it got wet after the bees died or before. So we see some bees in cells down in this area of the frame, and people think that means the bees starved, but there's food right here. It's because the bees were trying to stay warm, and so the bees go headfirst into the cell to heat up the cluster. And so these bees were trying to heat up the cluster before they died, and that's why they're stuck in the frames. So probably my best guess about this hive is that they didn't have a ton of bees, and you can see there's some bees here. We'll see if typically the queen's right in the middle of the cluster. Sometimes I find her, sometimes I don't. It depends on the hive. But you can see there's a fair amount of bees on here. I could do an alcohol wash. I didn't bring any alcohol to test to see if these bees have high mite counts. I would suspect, because this hive had a high mite count in the fall, because they had a ton of bees in the early fall, but by late fall they were pretty small. So I would guess that they were decimated by varroa mite viruses in the fall, even though I treated them several times. So we got another frame here, and here's the queen. Can you see her? It's right here. So there's the queen. And frequently you can find the queen. She's typically right in the middle of the hive. So there's they've eaten the food here, and you can see there's more heater bees down here. And I'm not sure, there's a lot of bees on the bottom board in this hive. And so, like I said, I think it's probably mites was the issue, and that the bees didn't live very long during the winter time because the mites really decimated them. And then the other issue probably was I didn't let them get this food to the right moisture content before winter, and that's probably part of it too. You can see in the middle of the frame right here, I'm not sure about the lighting, but there's some fermented honey, and that happens when the moisture content's too high. So that could have been that. I'll show you how many bees were on the bottom board. So that is a lot of dead bees. I can't even believe it. That's crazy. That's, 20,000 maybe. So I would say it's pretty likely that this hive was decimated by mites, and that made their size of their cluster so much smaller that they just couldn't stay warm anymore. And then probably it was also harder because I didn't get the feed into them in the fall early enough. And so this made it that the bees weren't able to get it to a low enough moisture content. So I would say this hive died from rural mite viruses, which lowered the population, and then also they didn't have the right moisture content in their food. So those combined factors led to them not being big enough to keep warm during one of those cold days in January. All right, so I lost this colony too. It's much, much smaller than the other one, it looks like. We got some poop issues right here. So some kind of stress, could be nosema, but really, some kind of food issues. Got a couple dead bees here towards the outside. So very interesting. I see brood right here, 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 here. So they had brood when they died. And you can see more brood right here. Some that was hatching even, I think. So this hive had brood for at least 3 weeks when they died. So since probably early January, got more of the last bit of the cluster. They seem really spread out to me, which is definitely an issue, but also there's just very little food. So far my best guess would just be they ran out of food. They starved. Here's the queen. There she is. Got her red dot. She was from this year. So in these cells in the middle, I see more capped brood. See this good mass of bees right here. The final, bits of the cluster, right in the middle. And I'm trying to look for eggs. And I think I see eggs right in the middle of this cluster. So you can see all these bees were trying to heat. They just couldn't stay warm. And maybe because they ran out of food, though. I see some food over here. So with deadouts, it's not really necessarily that one factor killed them. It's usually a combination of a lot of things. Here's the edge of the cluster. So this hive, no moisture issues in the frames. So what I would tend to guess for this was they kind of starved. Even though there's some food on this left side of the hive, they couldn't get to it, and possibly they got some honey in there from the early fall flow and had too much ash content, and so they have some stomach issues. And yeah, it just looks like their cluster was too small. They couldn't reach the food over here, and they already had some stress from maybe eating some fall honey that is tough on the bees' stomachs. So I would say partially because they're a small cluster, partially because there wasn't enough food in here. That's why they couldn't stay warm. This hive probably would have had a much better chance if I'd put it into a nuke, like a 6-frame nuke or a 5-frame nuke before winter, because they would have had to heat less of area. So, and I needed to feed them more. So compared to the last hive, this isn't even close as far as the amount of bees. On the bottom board, it's just not nearly as many. So yeah, I think that this hive is mostly starving and their population was just too small. 3 more colonies to look at to check to see what killed them. Same process for every hive, just like the last 2. We got a completely empty frame. So that's not really a good sign as far as food goes. Maybe they needed more food. Another completely empty frame of food. This one isn't 100% empty. It's got a tiny bit of honey on it. Not much though. And it's really wet as well. This one's heavier, but probably still wet. Yeah, wet. The only positive thing I can say about this is at least all the comb in the hives drawn. Like the outside frames were completely drawn. The last one that I did didn't have quite as much drawn comb. The cluster is right here in the middle. Probably be able to find the queen. See some emerging brood in here. And here's, oh, there's the queen, I think. Yeah, here's the queen. So far, it just seems like this hive's very small. And so pretty much one of the main reasons why hives are small is mites. So that's always my best guess when it comes to hives dying in the winter because of small size. See there in the cells right here. Probably they just didn't have enough bees due to the mites. See, once again, a little bit of food. So here's the bottom board. It's just not that many dead bees. So this hive was pretty weak going into winter, too small, and they just couldn't take the cold temperatures. So maybe they have a smaller population because of the mites in the fall, or maybe they were just a small hive because they didn't build up enough, and I should have combined them in the fall. So I should have taken this loss in the fall, and I didn't, and so here we are. So here's some pollen in here, and a little bit of honey. There's also some fermenting sugar syrup or honey. I doubt you'll be able to see it on camera, but it's right here. Probably, it doesn't mean a lot, just a little bit of it didn't get right down to the moisture content that it should, but kind of interesting nonetheless. This hive actually had 2 queens going into the fall. This frame's just more honey, and I would guess it's too high in moisture content. Actually, no, it's good. So, guess that's a good sign. Doesn't come out of the frames. More honey. Not a whole lot going on. So here's the final winter cluster. Pretty interesting. The bees look kind of wet, if that makes sense. I've heard about this happening, that they can get wet at the end of when they're like stressed out and about to die. Let me know in the comments if you have experienced like wet bees. It's happened to me before during winter where they look wet right before they die, or once the cluster dies and you go in to look at them, they're wet. All right, I see some varroa mites. I really doubt that my phone will be able to focus well enough for you to see the varroa mite, but it's right there next to the abdomen. I see mites on some of the other bees too. So, it would make sense that it was the mites that killed them. Weakened them enough so they couldn't even heat the hive anymore. I don't see a queen yet, but there may be 2. Here's the other last bit of the cluster. Here's the queen. And I don't see another one. It's possible they killed her before wintertime, and that's why I don't see her. But this one, I feel more definitive than a lot of the others. Like, you'll never know 100%. There's a varroa mite on my finger. It's not gonna focus, but I feel pretty definitive in why this one died. They definitely had too high of a mite count, because I'm actually seeing the mites on them. On the cover, it says they only had 3 mites on August 5th, and I treated them before winter, but obviously that treatment wasn't that effective because I can see a lot of mites on the bees, and their population was pretty high in the fall. So the mites killed a lot of their bees before wintertime. So here's the bottom board. Barely any bees on there. This hive definitely died of mite issues. And there's a mouse nest under there, so that's nice too. Thanks, mice. Here's another really small hive. So the end of the cluster is down in here, and I would suspect that it's another mite issue. This kind of goes without saying, but yeah, make sure you're really careful when you're pulling out these frames, because I almost break them every time. So this one's incredibly light, a little bit more fermented sugar syrup or honey. But these just had a very small cluster, I think, in this hive. I don't know, there's kind of randomly some bees sitting on the top of the frame there. I can't even really tell where the cluster was. I guess I see a little brood here. But it's possible this one even absconded before winter, with how little organization I'm seeing here. I don't really even see a final winter cluster. So we have some dead bees on the bottom board. Once again, I found more varroa mites on the bees. I don't even see a queen. So I would say this hive definitely died due to mites. Maybe they just had a weak queen, and so they didn't build up big enough, but I would tend to think that mites were at least a supporting factor in how weak they are, which ultimately led to their death. Dead outs suck. It sucks to lose bees. Beekeepers spend so much time with their bees, and then to lose them is heartbreaking. And so I made this video today to help people identify why they lost their hives, so they won't let that happen again. And for me, the biggest thing I can do is be more on top of my mites. I treated plenty of times, but I didn't do enough testing, so I didn't know if my treatments were working or not. And spoiler alert, some of them didn't, because these bees in these boxes still aren't alive. Hives weren't big enough, should have combined them. That also could have helped, and I also didn't get enough feed into them or early enough. So figure out what you did wrong. Use this video to help you figure out what happened to your hives, so next year you can stop that from happening. Let me know how many hives you lost, how many you got through winter. I hope you all had a great beekeeping winter, but you know, some years are tougher than others. This year I lost 28% of my hives, so it wasn't a great year. But let me know how you did in the comments. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.